Right now, while you're reading this, someone somewhere just lost access to their Gmail account. Not because they were careless, not because they used a weak password, not because they clicked on something obviously suspicious. They lost it because of a setting that was already switched on inside their phone before they even downloaded a single app. A setting that Google enabled by default. A setting that 8 billion Gmail users around the world have never once questioned. And here's the most terrifying part. You almost certainly have it too. This is not a scare tactic. This is documented, verified, and happening right now in 2025. Let us start with something that will completely change the way you think about your phone. Gmail is not just an email app. For most people, it is the master key to their entire digital life. Your Gmail account is connected to your Google Photos, your Google Pay, your Chrome saved passwords, your YouTube history, your Google Drive documents, your Android backup, and in many cases, your banking apps and work accounts. Every single one of those things sits behind one login, your Gmail. And yet, despite all of that, most people treat Gmail like it is just a place where promotional emails go to die. They open it, skim through it, tap a few links, and move on without ever thinking about what is actually happening in the background when they do that. That casual relationship with one of the most sensitive apps on your phone is exactly what hackers in 2025 are counting on. They are not guessing. They have studied your behavior, your habits, your trust in familiar-looking emails, and they have built an entire industry around it. To understand the scale of what we are dealing with, you first need to understand just how massive Gmail's footprint actually is. As of 2025, Gmail has over 1.8 billion active users worldwide, and some estimates push that number closer to 2. 5 billion when you count all registered accounts. That means roughly 22% of the entire global population uses Gmail. Every single day, over 121 billion emails are sent through Gmail alone, which accounts for nearly 30% of all email traffic on the planet. And the critical detail that makes all of this relevant to your security is this. 75 to 85% of all Gmail opens happen on mobile devices. The Gmail app has been downloaded over 10 billion times on Android alone. This is not a small niche community of tech users. This is practically every person you know, including your parents, your coworkers, your friends, your children. And the majority of them are opening Gmail on their phones without the faintest idea of the exposure they are creating every single time they tap a link inside that app. Now let us talk about Android for a moment, because this matters enormously. Android controls 79% of global smartphone sales as of Q3 2025. There are 9 billion Android users worldwide, a number that grew 8% from the previous year. In countries like India, Android market share sits at 21%. In Indonesia, it is 8%. And Brazil, 45%. These are not small numbers. These are entire nations of people who are almost exclusively on Android. And Gmail comes pre-installed and set as the default email client on virtually every one of those devices. What that means is that the vulnerability we are about to discuss does not just affect a portion of Gmail users, it affects the overwhelming majority of smartphone users on Earth. And most of them have absolutely no idea that this problem exists inside their pocket right now. Here is where things start to get genuinely serious, and this is the part that most tech channels and mainstream media are completely failing to explain properly. When you open Gmail on your Android phone and you tap a link inside any email, whether it is a promotional email, a delivery notification, a banking alert, or anything else, Gmail does not automatically send that link to your browser. By default, Gmail is configured to open that link inside the app itself using what is called an in-app browser. Now, that might sound like a minor technical detail, but the security implications of that single default behavior are enormous, and cybersecurity experts have been raising alarms about it throughout 2025. What you need to understand is that an in-app browser and a dedicated browser, like Google Chrome, are fundamentally different in terms of the security protection they offer you. When you browse inside Gmail's in-app environment, you do not have access to Chrome's full suite of security tools. You do not have Chrome's safe browsing system actively checking every URL in real time. You do not have full site isolation, which prevents malicious websites from leaking data across different tabs. You do not have the advanced memory protections that Chrome has built into its architecture. You are browsing inside a stripped-down, limited environment, and if a malicious link is designed to exploit that environment, it has a significantly better chance of succeeding than it would inside a proper browser. Cybersecurity professionals and independent experts have been very clear about this throughout 2025. The managing director of one cybersecurity firm put it this way in a published analysis this year. If you want real control over your privacy and security, you should skip the in-app browser entirely and use your device's native browser instead. The reasoning is straightforward. In-app browsers give the hosting app more control over what you see and what data they can access during your session. Unlike Chrome or Safari, in-app browsers keep you in the dark about what is being tracked, where your data is being sent, and how long that data is being retained. You cannot check security settings inside an in-app browser. You cannot clear cookies independently. You cannot add privacy extensions. You have no visibility and no control. And when a malicious web page is designed to exploit that lack of protection, the window between you tapping a link and malware reaching your device can be measured in seconds. Not minutes, not hours. Seconds. Think about what that means in a real-world scenario. You receive an email. It says your package is delayed and needs you to confirm a small additional charge. The email looks completely legitimate. It has the correct logo, the right fonts, an authentic-looking sender address. You tap the link without thinking twice, because it looks exactly like something you would receive from a real delivery company. Inside Gmail's in-app browser, that link loads a page that appears to be a payment form, but behind the scenes, the malicious code embedded in that page is already working. It is attempting to access your browser session data. It is looking for saved credentials. It is trying to install what security researchers in 2025 call infostealer malware, silent background programs that do not announce themselves, do not slow down your phone, and do not trigger any obvious warning. They simply sit there, running in the background, collecting your passwords, your banking credentials, your session cookies, and your personal data, and sending all of it to a remote server controlled by the attacker. And because the whole thing happened inside Gmail's in-app browser instead of Chrome, many of the safety nets that could have flagged or blocked that activity were simply never engaged. This is not a theoretical threat. The data from 2025 proves it is happening at a scale that should concern every Gmail user on Earth. In late October 2025, cybersecurity researcher Troy Hunt, the founder of Have I Been Pwned, the most trusted breach notification platform in the world, added a dataset to his system that immediately sent shockwaves through the security community. The dataset, compiled by threat intelligence firm Synthient, contained approximately 183 million unique email addresses and their associated passwords. The total size of the data dump was 5 terabytes, one of the largest credential dumps ever discovered. And the breakdown of what was inside was alarming. 4 million Gmail accounts appeared in that dataset for the very first time, meaning they had never been flagged in any previous breach. These were fresh victims, new compromises, real people who had no idea their credentials were already sitting on dark web marketplaces and being traded across Telegram channels before they had even noticed anything wrong with their account. Google responded quickly and was transparent about one important thing. Their servers were not directly hacked. This is a distinction that sounds reassuring, but actually reveals something far more disturbing about how modern attacks work. The credentials in that 5 terabyte dump were not stolen from Google's infrastructure. They were stolen from users' devices using infostealer malware. The malware arrived through phishing emails, fake software downloads, and malicious browser extensions. Once installed on a device, it operated completely silently. It targeted saved data inside browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, extracting saved passwords, autofill entries, browsing history, and crucially, session cookies. Session cookies are the small authentication tokens that keep you logged into websites without requiring you to re-enter your password every time. When an attacker steals your session cookie, they do not need your password at all. They can take that cookie, load it into their own browser on their own device, and immediately access your account as if they were you, bypassing two-factor authentication entirely in many cases, because as far as the website is concerned, the session was already authenticated. Synthient's analysis of the data revealed a trend that should make every Android and Gmail user deeply uncomfortable. Stolen credentials increased by more than 800% in the first half of 2025 alone. On some individual days during that period, the firm recorded up to 600 million stolen passwords being captured and circulated. Read that number again, 600 million stolen passwords in a single day. That is not a slow, patient attack campaign. That is an industrial scale operation, automated and running continuously, targeting ordinary people who simply did not know that a setting on their phone was leaving a door unlocked. The company also identified a broader trend that Google itself acknowledged. Phishing and infostealer attacks grew 37% year over year in 2025, and that growth showed no signs of slowing down. Now let us talk about the nature of the attacks themselves, because this is where 2025 became genuinely different from anything we had seen before. In early 2025, the FBI issued an explicit formal warning about AI-driven phishing campaigns, specifically targeting Gmail accounts. This was not a generic advisory. The FBI pointed to a specific, documented shift in how phishing attacks were being constructed and delivered. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, followed with a message that was blunt and unambiguous. Their guidance to users was this: the message is simple and uncompromising. Do not click on anything. That level of directness from a federal cybersecurity agency is extraordinarily rare. and it tells you everything you need to know about how serious the threat environment had become by early 2025. To understand why these agencies were so alarmed, you need to understand what AI has done to phishing. Traditional phishing emails were relatively easy to spot if you knew what to look for. They had grammar mistakes, generic greetings, slightly off logos, suspicious sender addresses. The telltale signs were everywhere once you knew how to look. But AI-powered phishing in 2025 has eliminated virtually all of those signals. Attackers are now using large language models to craft phishing emails that perfectly mimic the writing style, tone, and formatting of legitimate communications from banks, delivery services, government agencies, and even Google itself. They personalize each email using scraped data from social media, previous breaches, and public records, so the email might reference your actual name, your actual bank, or a recent purchase you actually made. Independent research showed that AI-generated spear phishing attacks improved their success rate by 55% between 2023 and 2025. And in controlled tests, AI phishing agents outperformed some human hacking teams in terms of how many victims they successfully deceived. The most alarming real-world example of this new AI-powered threat came to light in April 2025, when a highly sophisticated phishing campaign targeted Gmail users by exploiting weaknesses inside Google's own infrastructure. Ethereum developer Nick Johnson shared screenshots of an email that appeared to be a completely legitimate Google security alert. It referenced a legal subpoena on his account. It looked exactly like real communications Google sends, and it was sent from an address that appeared to be an official Google domain. Johnson said the email was valid, signed, and displayed absolutely no warnings inside Gmail. It passed every security check. The websites it linked to were hosted on sites.google.com, Google's own domain, and yet it was entirely fraudulent. Google later confirmed that the attackers had exploited a vulnerability in Gmail's infrastructure to make these emails appear genuine. This was not a simple spam campaign. This was a sophisticated, technically advanced attack that fooled people who understood cybersecurity and were actively looking for warning signs. And here is the critical connection that most people are completely missing when they read about that attack. When a phishing email that passes every visual inspection lands in your inbox, and you are conditioned by years of habit to tap links inside Gmail and have them open right there in the app, you have already lost before the malware even loads. The combination of an AI-crafted email that looks completely legitimate and Gmail's default behavior of opening links inside its in-app browser creates a scenario where even skeptical, security-conscious users can be compromised. You cannot rely on your instincts alone anymore. You cannot rely on spotting typos or suspicious logos. The email will look real. The link will look real. The page it opens will look real. The only layer of protection you have left at that point is the security infrastructure of the browser you are using to view that page. And if Gmail is opening it inside its own in-app environment, you are going into that situation without your most important defenses active. Beyond email, Android itself has a second layer of this same vulnerability that most users have never been told about, and it compounds the risk significantly. By default, Android is configured to open certain types of links inside apps rather than routing them to your browser. This means that even outside of Gmail, when you tap a link inside WhatsApp, or inside a text message, or inside any number of other apps you use every day, your phone may be sending you into an unprotected in-app environment instead of Chrome or your default secure browser. The security architecture of Chrome on Android in 2020 includes features like Android Advanced Protection Mode, which was made available in Android 16 with Chrome 137 and later versions. When this mode is active, Chrome enforces full site isolation across all websites, meaning each site is contained within its own process, dramatically reducing the risk that a malicious site can access data from another tab or session. It enforces always use secure connections, which ensures that every page loads over HTTPS and warns you the moment something tries to downgrade to an unencrypted connection. It activates Android's safe browsing live threat protection, which checks URLs against a continuously updated database of known malicious sites in real time. It turns off JavaScript optimizations that, while they make browsing faster, can also create security vulnerabilities that attackers have learned to exploit. None of these protections exist inside Gmail's in-app browser. None of them. When you open a link inside Gmail's in-app environment, you are browsing without any of this infrastructure working in your favor. The threat from malicious Android apps adds yet another dimension to this problem that the mainstream conversation about Gmail security is almost entirely ignoring. In 2024, according to Malwarebytes' 2025 State of Malware report, researchers detected over 22,800 phishing apps on Android. These were apps disguised as legitimate tools that were designed to deceive users, steal credentials, and intercept authentication codes. Of those 22,800 apps, 5,200 had the capability to bypass multi-factor authentication by reading text messages containing one-time passwords. Another 4800 could access the Android notification bar to read and intercept the same kind of two-factor authentication codes. This means that even users who believed they were protected because they had enabled two-factor authentication on their Gmail accounts were potentially still vulnerable, because the malicious apps on their devices were designed specifically to circumvent that protection. The combination of a malicious link opened inside Gmail's in-app browser and a compromised Android environment creates a compounding risk that most users are not equipped to understand, let alone defend against. What makes all of this so particularly frustrating is that there are very specific, very simple changes you can make right now that dramatically reduce your exposure to everything we have just discussed. These are not complicated technical procedures. Yes, they do not require you to root your phone, install specialized security software, or understand anything about network architecture. They are settings adjustments that take under 2 minutes to complete, and they address the core vulnerability that has been exploited by attackers throughout 2025. The first thing you need to do is open your Gmail app and navigate to the settings menu. On Android, you access this by tapping the 3 horizontal lines in the top left corner of the screen, which opens the main navigation menu. From there, you scroll down and select Settings, then tap on General Settings. When you're inside General Settings, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and you will find an option labeled Open Web Links in Gmail. This option is switched on by default. That is not a coincidence, and it is not there purely for your convenience. It means that every link you have ever tapped inside Gmail on your phone has been opening inside the app's limited, less protected in-app browser, rather than routing to Chrome where your full security stack is active. You need to turn that option off right now. That single toggle means that from this point forward, every link you tap inside Gmail will be pushed out to your default browser, where Chrome's safe browsing, full site isolation, and all of its other protections will be fully active and working on your behalf. One setting, one toggle, a completely different security outcome. Take a moment and absorb the magnitude of what just happened. The foreign minister of Iran announced one policy. The military of Iran announced the exact opposite policy. Both statements went out on the same official state apparatus within hours of each other. And the supreme leader, the one figure who, under Iranian constitutional law, is supposed to resolve exactly this kind of dispute, said nothing, because he could not speak, or he was not allowed to speak, or he was no longer the one making the decisions. And this is where everything changes, because the immediate reaction inside Iran was not just confusion, it was rage. Pro-regime mobs, the very people who normally march in defense of the supreme leader, began pouring into the streets of Tehran with a completely new demand. They were not protesting against the regime in the traditional sense. They were protesting against the people inside the regime who they believed had surrendered to the Americans. They began calling Araghchi a traitor. They began calling for his impeachment. They began calling for his arrest. And in some quarters, they began calling for his execution. A lawmaker named Mustafa Mohammadi went on the record demanding the impeachment of Araghchi over what he described as untimely statements made during a sensitive wartime period. He accused the foreign minister of damaging Iran's position in global oil markets. He accused him of leaking diplomatic ground that should never have been conceded, and he said that if it had not been for the cover of wartime emergency, Araghchi would already have been removed from office. Other politicians followed. A former culture minister named Mozani warned that Iran was losing the psychological warfare battle. He warned that the Supreme National Security Council had failed to appoint a credible spokesperson. He warned that the regime was losing the war of narratives, which until that point had been one of the few fronts where Iran still believed it had an edge. And here's the cruelest part for Tehran. The oil markets reacted exactly the way the regime feared. The moment Araghchi made his announcement, oil prices began to collapse. Brent crude dropped from levels above $100 per barrel to as low as $83 in a single trading session. That collapse was catastrophic for the only piece of leverage Iran had left over the United States. For weeks, the entire Iranian strategy had been built around using the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz to drive up global oil prices, generate political pressure inside Western economies, and force the Trump administration to back down from its blockade. The moment that leverage evaporated, the entire negotiating position of the Islamic Republic evaporated with it. Now think about what this means in raw, strategic terms. Iran has no functioning long-range air force. Its missile arsenals have been depleted by months of strikes. Its proxies in Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq have been decimated. Its top military commanders have been killed one after another, including Hossein Salami, Mohammad Kazemi, Mohammad Pakpour, and Majid Kademi, all of whom were assassinated by airstrikes in the 12-day war of June 2025, or the 2026 Iran war that followed. Its intelligence apparatus has been gutted. Its naval forces are bottled up by an American blockade. And the only remaining card it could play was the threat of choking the world's most important shipping lane. That card has now been thrown on the table, and the world saw that it was a bluff. This is not chaos, this is collapse. And this is exactly why the IRGC is now in open rebellion against its own diplomatic apparatus. The Revolutionary Guard understands something that the Foreign Ministry has refused to accept. If the Strait of Hormuz card is gone, then Iran has nothing left to bring to any negotiating table. The only thing that has kept Iran in any conversation at all is fear. The fear of what Iran might do, the fear of regional escalation, the fear of energy disruption. Take away that fear, and Iran becomes irrelevant. Take away that fear, and the regime cannot extract a single concession from Washington. Take away that fear, and the Islamic Republic is reduced to a wounded animal, hoping for mercy in a world that has stopped listening. That is the real reason the IRGC is openly demanding internal regime change. According to leaked policy discussions reported by outlets including Iran International and the Tehran Chamber of Commerce, senior IRGC commanders have begun to argue that the current civilian leadership, including President Masoud Pezeshkian, has failed catastrophically. They argue that the Foreign Ministry has bargained away leverage without consultation. They argue that the entire diplomatic track must be shut down. And in a series of moves that have been described in major Western outlets as a soft seizure of state functions, the IRGC has already blocked President Pezeshkian from key decision-making forums, halted the negotiation track with the United States, and centralized military and economic coordination under its own command structure. This is the soft coup that no one is calling a coup. Because no tank has rolled, no declaration has been broadcast, but every meaningful function of the Iranian state has now been pulled into the orbit of the Revolutionary Guard, and the demand that is being whispered in the corridors of the Assembly of Experts, in the editorial offices of hardline outlets, in private dinners between senior clerics, is the demand that Mojtaba Khamenei step aside in favor of a leadership structure that the IRGC fully controls. And this is where the story climbs to its most dangerous level. Because while the regime is fracturing at the top, the streets of Iran are erupting at the bottom. The protests that began in late December 2025 over economic collapse have never truly ended. According to estimates compiled by the National Council of Resistance of Iran and verified by multiple international human rights monitors, as many as 40,000 Iranians have been killed by IRGC and Basij security forces during the street-level uprising that swept the country in January and February. Another 43,000 are believed to have been arrested. Many of them have already been executed. Mass hangings have been reported on a near-weekly basis since mid-March. Death sentences have been issued by revolutionary courts in Shiraz, Tehran, Marvdasht, and other cities, often under the catch-all charge of enmity against God. Across the country, resistance units linked to the People's Mojahedin organization have been carrying out coordinated operations against regime infrastructure. In Tehran, they set fire to a Basij base. In Azadshar, they targeted security force installations. In Chabahar, Elam, Iranshar, Lordagan, and Saravan, they burned propaganda posters featuring the late Ali Khamenei. The slogan on the streets has become brutally clear: down with the oppressor, whether he is the Shah or the supreme leader. That single sentence captures the position of the Iranian people. They are not interested in replacing one tyranny with another. They are not interested in a Pahlavi restoration. They are not interested in a continuation of the Islamic Republic under a new face. They want the entire structure to fall. And the regime knows this, which is why the internet blackout that began on January 8th, 2026, has not been lifted. Iran has now been under the longest sustained internet shutdown in its modern history. The IRGC, the Supreme National Security Council, and the Ministry of Communications have all coordinated to suppress information flows, prevent organized protest, and isolate Iranian citizens from the outside world. NetBlocks has confirmed that the regime is not only maintaining domestic internet controls, but is now seeking to extend its influence over regional communications infrastructure. There are even reports that the IRGC is preparing to demand licensing fees from major technology companies, including Meta, Alphabet, and Microsoft, for use of submarine fiber optic cables that pass through Iranian-controlled waters near the Strait of Hormuz. That is how desperate the regime has become. They are trying to monetize the very choke point that they just admitted they cannot fully control. Now here is where the picture becomes truly disturbing. Because the more the regime suppresses information, the more the Iranian people radicalize. The more it executes protesters, the more it confirms its own illegitimacy. The more the IRGC sidelines the supreme leader, the more the religious foundation of the Islamic Republic dissolves. Every action the regime takes to stabilize itself accelerates its collapse. And in the middle of all this, the foreign minister is still in his position, the president is still nominally in office, the supreme leader is still officially in power, and the Revolutionary Guard is increasingly making it clear that none of those titles mean what they used to mean.